Okay, getting started with animation. Animation is something that you want to do in objects mode, and there's probably a few exceptions to that, but not many. Basically, it should be in objects mode. Where you put your pivot point is critical to where something is animated. Yes, you can actually animate the pivot point. Don't do it unless there's a really good reason. I've never needed to do it, but it is actually possible. Okay, so before we get started with the animation, you want to stretch out your timeline, and it's really you want to plan through, how long is your shot. You guys are doing 25 frames per second, and so you want to keep that in mind when laying out the timeline. You also want to then go to Windows, Settings, and Preferences, and you want to make sure that your settings are set to 25 frames per second. There we go. And the other thing is you pop down to Time Slider, and you want to have it set to play real time, 25 frames per second. Notice it updates that for me. Okay, so before I changed it to 25, it said 24, and that's what it said in this window if I'd gone there first. Okay, so you hit save, and good. All right, so you have your object, you want to animate it. Anything in Maya is animatable. Textures, lights, everything has properties that you can set keyframes on. It's wonderful. All right, so the way I want you to start animating is very deliberate. You want to do key selected, so that's a right mouse button. You can also get it to channels here and key selected. So you just select things and you key them. Okay, so right now I'm on frame, all right, basically 1. I'm slightly off for some reason. And if I go to the end of the motion here, actually let's get a slightly smaller range. Let's try, I don't know, 36. Okay, so if I go to frame 36 and move this object, well, I guess I'll slide it along this way. Okay, so that's moved in just the Z-axis, and then you want to key selected again. If I bring up my graph editor, which is under Windows, Animation Editors, Graph Editor, I hit A on the keyboard to frame the selection of what I've done. So you select your guys here. These are my translates, and I hit A on the keyboard. So notice my rotates aren't keyed, but also notice that my translate Y and my translate X are keyed. So if I was to go to, let's say, frame 20 and animated this guy in X, you see what happens. He now animates and comes back down to that keyframe. So that's really important to have that in mind, that it's going to come back if you key out of sequence or out of time. All right, so the graph editor, it is, well, it's a basic graph, and so you have your time going horizontal, value going up and down. So sometimes you're going to be having values between 0 and 1, and sometimes it's 0 to 7,362. It doesn't matter as long as it looks good out here. All right, so let's select that and delete that. Okay, so there's my basic motion. I hit play, and there it goes. All right, now it's jittering a little bit just because I have it set to play every frame, and I'm on a laptop machine. I'm running Maya, which is pretty heavy, and the recording software, which is pretty heavy. So it's not giving me great playback. All right. Stop. Okay. So let's do a little bit in the graph editor and then address that issue. All right, so I'm going to just look at the translate Z here, and as you see, we have these curves. Okay, and so what I can do is I can adjust the curves. Now I'm selecting it. All right, selecting the Bezier handle. I have the move tool selected over here, and then with the middle mouse button, I'm making an adjustment. All right, so let's take a look at this. This is an ease in, very important. And okay, so now if we hit play, it goes like that. But once again, it's still jumping a bit. So to really judge it, I want to go to Windows and Play Blast, or I can right mouse button down here and get to Play Blast. Option box. Alrighty, let's see. Show ornaments off. Yeah, fine. Scale. So that's the scale of the window, or I can set it up to my render globals. Remove temporary files. That will kill it off. Save to file. Okay. Yep. And weird. Okay. Well, I'll try this guy. It's QuickTime. I usually do IFFs, but this time we'll just do it this way. So I hit apply, and what it's going to do is it's going to run through each one of those frames and record it out into a movie. This is where I make my judgments on, is it good motion or is it bad motion? All right, so yeah, my machine was running fairly slow. Typically, like my home machine, I do something this simple, it runs too fast. So anyhow, you test it with the Play Blast. All right. So, and for some of you is an assignment, is to turn in Play Blasts. All right, let's go back to our friend the graph editor. So all 3D softwares have a thing called a graph editor. Well, may not be called it, but anyhow, it does the same purpose. It has roughly the same interface. Okay, so right now I have it set to splines, which is, let's see, that's the new icon. Okay, so these give me these nice splines and spliney motion on things. If I select the curve, I just did a box and selected it. If I go to linear, it's going to give me a linear curve between those 2 points. All right, so spline is typically what I have it set to as a default. Come on, there we go. All right, there's the spline. And yeah, so that's a good place to start, and then you go through and keyframe by keyframe, you can do what you need to do. So you see now this guy is linear, and he's going to do a slow out and a fast in. All right, so that's what that means. So you got to get used to reading these things. So that guy's the linear. We also have a great thing. Let's, all right, if I extend the timeline a little bit. Okay, pop over to here, and okay, and key selected. So I now have another keyframe. So this is giving me the spline out. Okay, so that's sort of nice there. And what I can do is I can select the keyframe, and this little guy will break the tangents. That allows me to move the guys on either side independently. So I can have a linear in, and then I can have a spline out on this side, or do whatever I need to do next. Okay. Now to get something to stay still for a while, all right, sometimes you're going to need to have it flatlined. And a handy setting to know about is this guy. This will flat tangent it, and okay, and so when these guys line up on each other, okay, all right, when they're the same duration, it's going to flatten that out. All right, let's make sure that guy gets broken again, and yeah, so there. Okay, so that's what that guy does. It's basically spline tangents, but if these two values are the same, it flats them and keeps them still until you tweak it. Yeah, so very handy. So this guy also just does a flat, but that's if I grab both of these guys in flat tangent, you see what it does. Okay, so where this guy really only does splines except when the values are the same. Oh, other little things here. Okay, so as I move this value around, and you can see what happens, I can move in time, I can move in value, I can hold down shift and constrain and say, hey, I like that keyframe, but I don't like where it is at that point in time. Or I can hold down shift and say, hey, I like that value, but I need it to be a little later, a little bit earlier. Okay, and so what happens is I hold down shift, I middle mouse button, and if I move the mouse up and down, you see it constrains it in time, and if I middle mouse button and first move horizontally, it constrains it in value. So very handy. There's some buttons for it somewhere, but anyhow. So and also you can see that the value, I can type it in by the numbers here. So I can say, all right, well that needs to be exactly 360 degrees or 90 degrees or something like that if I'm doing rotation. So there's 12. And this is time. So I go, oh man, that's getting there just a split second, too early. And so I can dial that back to, 29. And I can do it by the numbers and have it nice and precise. Okay, so selecting things is left mouse button or middle mouse buttoning to move things. You have to have the move tool selected here. The scale tool is very handy. So you can grab the scale tool, and you see if you click down, and then if you start moving horizontally, it scales it in time from where you've clicked, okay? Or if I click down here and move vertically first, it scales it in value from where I've clicked. So it's very dependent of where you've clicked on things. All right, so that's your basics of your animation tool. Of course, you have to have your object selected. You need to show up anything in here, you need at least one keyframe. Okay, so now these rotations are at least in there. Nothing happens though. You need to tell it to be somewhere else with some sort of value. And I might as well rotate this thing. That's why I modeled it that way. So I just zip this guy around a few times. And okay, so I hit A on the keyboard and it scales up the graph, and I can look at this and go, okay, that rotation between 0 and negative 2,144 looks like that. I want to do grab the move tool again, and I'm going to do a slow in on that. So that's one of your options there, and then you test it. Yeah, so it takes a lot of work, a lot of effort to get good motion, good animation. But those are your basic tools. The only other things I really use is sometimes I'll hold down Shift and I'll move the keyframes here in the timeline. So that's Shift, drag, select, and then I can move. I can also grab the handles on either end. I can scale like that. That also works. Or if I want to copy and paste a value, let's say I like this value here, I can middle mouse button, drag it here to 60. It doesn't update the interface, and I can just say I'm going to keyframe the rotation there. But I have to be aware of what happens when it splines. So as you see, even those two values, since they're the same, they've splined and it dips. Okay, it goes forward and back again. And so you just have to be aware of that. So I just hit that spline with flat tangents when the values are the same. Alright, so play blast, remember that, that's important, and remember to set it to play real time when you're doing animation, and play every frame when you're doing particles. Um, so that's the rule of thumb on that one. Have fun.